Please give a warm welcome to Mac Warner, West Virginia Secretary of State, and Sheila Nix, President of Tusk Philanthropies.
Hi, everyone. I know it's late in the day, so thank you all for staying for this panel. We're both really excited about the work we've done together on a mobile voting project that we're going to talk about today. I don't even know where to start. there's so much to do. So I'll give you a little background on myself, but then we'll also give you a little background on Secretary Warner, and then we're going to start with a video that kind of describes the project, and then we'll go and discuss it and take your questions as well. So like I said, I'm Sheila Nix. I've been working at Tusk Philanthropies for about a year and a half, working on this project and the idea of people being able to vote on their phones primarily. And prior to that, I was in the White House. I worked for Dr. Jill Biden as her chief of staff. And one of the, as you'll hear a little more about this pilot, it's focused on military voters. And when I worked with Jill, she worked with Michelle Obama on a project called Joining Forces that was supporting military families. And one of the things that we found as we traveled both around bases in the US and overseas was that a lot of deployed military had issues around voting, weren't able to vote, difficulties in getting their ballot back and counted on time. So when we started thinking about how to start this project, it seemed to make a lot of sense based on a lot of the stuff that I had seen to work with military voters. So prior to working with Jill Biden, I ran the vice president's part of the re-election campaign in 2012. And before that, I worked in the US Senate for about 10 years for Bill Nelson from Florida and Bob Kerrey from Nebraska. Bob was also a military veteran. And I worked as deputy governor in the state of Illinois. So I've been around politics, voting, elections for a long time. And got to meet with Secretary Warner. I'll tell you a little bit about him and how our project got started. Secretary Warner is a West Point graduate and also a graduate of the West Virginia University School of Law, also 2 master's degrees in international law, so very well qualified in this space. Secretary Warner had a 23-year career in the Army, and he was deployed on 4 different continents. At the same time, he was on the faculty of the U.S. Army War College. So lots of experience both in the field and on the policy side. And then prior to being elected Secretary of State, he spent 5 years in Afghanistan working with the State Department, and then was elected West Virginia Secretary of State and took office about 2 years ago in January of 2017, and has had really an amazing 2 years. He's in the leadership at the National Association of Secretaries of State, focusing on cybersecurity and innovation, and he's updated the state's registration list, as well as added 104,000 new voters in the state. 1/3 of those are high school students, so really promoting voting among everybody, including young people, and getting them started. And was interested in and he'll talk about this a little bit later, on making it easier for military members to vote. We were starting to put together some pilot projects on making voting easier. So through a weird series of coincidences of people knowing people, we were able to get connected and started the project in 2018, first in the primary and then in the general election. So why don't we show the video now and give you a sense of the project, and then Secretary Warner will take some questions and explain kind of his interest.
At the heart of democracy is the right to vote. It's a right our servicemen and women stand guard to protect. But for those serving or living overseas, casting a ballot has long been a complex and complicated process. That's about to change. The West Virginia Secretary of State's office is piloting a new way to vote, one that takes advantage of today's latest technology and puts West Virginia front and center as a leader. Your smartphone becomes a tool to receive, vote, and cast your ballot securely. The first step in the process is to submit a federal postcard application, which you can get from the Federal Voting Assistance Program, your voting assistance officer, or your county clerk. To access the application online, go to fvap.gov. Click the red and white election materials tab at the top of the page and follow the simple instructions. Then, use your phone to return it via email. If you are a registered voter in one of these counties, you are able to participate using this pilot program. The county clerk's office will verify your voter registration. Once approved, you will be sent instructions via email on how to receive your ballot. Those instructions are sent generally within 24 hours of the clerk receiving your application. Next, download the Votes app to your smartphone. It will then ask you to verify your identity by taking a picture of a government-issued ID. According to federal law, the Common Access Card, CAC, is not to be photographed. So please use a driver's license, passport, or other government-issued ID. To verify that the ID matches the person using the app, you'll be prompted to take a video selfie, moving your eyes around a bit by blinking to show it's a live person. The Votes app uses facial recognition technology to match the two likenesses. Generally, it will take a matter of minutes for your identity to be verified, but it could take longer. Next, log out of your app and back in, clicking Verification Status. Once you're verified, you'll see a white check next to Basic Identity. Once your identity is verified, the county clerk sends a ballot to your phone, the exact ballot for your home precinct. Click Elections from the app's home screen to access your ballot. Choose your selections by touching each desired candidate's name on the screen. Voting made easy, anywhere in the world, using today's technology. Once you're done voting, the app will prompt you to use a fingerprint or selfie as a final biometric verification. And with that, no matter where you are serving, no matter which continent you live on, your secure ballot is delivered back to West Virginia and will count on Election Day. How do you know that your vote is private, safe, and secure? Without too much detail, 3 things happen. 1. The vote immediately goes into BlockChainge, a digital lockbox that keeps it secure until election night, when designated officials open the lockbox. 2. You receive an email copy of your completed ballot, which allows you to verify your selections. And 3. An email copy of the completed ballot is sent to the West Virginia Secretary of State's office, to be opened only to audit the results extracted from the digital lockbox, or if there's a question about the validity of the ballot. On Election Day, the electronic digital lockbox is opened, and your ballot is counted with the rest of your county's results. With the option of mobile voting for uniformed and overseas citizens, West Virginia is leading the nation and serving those who serve us.
So that's a little bit about it. Kind of give you a good sense of how it works. Secretary Warner, do you want to tell a little bit about your interest and your experience as a military voter yourself, and how you came to take a leadership role on this?
Sure. I tend to get up and move around a little bit. I first want to do a quick shout out to Sheila and Tusk Philanthropies for being the partner in this. None of this could have happened without them, and they've been able to fund this pilot program without it costing the taxpayers of West Virginia a penny. And so I really do appreciate that. And just by way of we're all in a political world here, okay? I come from the Republican side, conservative side, and Sheila, as you heard, working with Vice President Biden and his wife and so forth, and Bloomberg and Bradley Tusk tends to be on the left side, Democrat side. But we're all concerned about providing free, fair, safe elections, okay? And that's the key to this. I worked with the Belfer Center up at Harvard, and the same thing, where Robbie Mook was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, and Matt Rhodes was Mitt Romney's campaign manager. Both of those campaigns were hacked. A lot of us have heard about Hillary's, a lot of us have not heard about Mitt Romney's. But again, the left and the right coming together at Harvard, the #1 research program in the world, again, to defend digital democracy. So we're all playing this area together. It's not a left-right, it's not a political thing, it's an American thing to solve this problem. And so my heart got started in this, having been a soldier and having had trouble voting. And then when I went back with the State Department to Afghanistan for 5 years, and I was not able to vote in the 2012 and 2014 elections because I did not have mail service. Where I was, if you remember the Buddha niches that were blown up before 9/11, 6 months before when the Taliban went into Afghanistan, they went in and they blew up these two, the world's largest Buddha statues. That's where I lived, okay? For 3 years I was over there in Bamiyan, and we did not have mail service. So when those 12 and 14 elections came around, I was not able to vote. And I had a son who was wounded in Afghanistan. I had a daughter who served in Afghanistan. In fact, she and I spent Christmas Eve 2013 being mortared at Bagram Air Base, okay? Had trouble voting. So this is what you're about to hear. I'm glad you all stuck around to hear this presentation at the end of the day, because there's a lot of stuff out there about using a mobile device, using a phone to vote, okay? Is it safe or not? Using the blockchain and all that kind of thing. Folks, I didn't dictate that the blockchain be used. I didn't dictate that a phone was to be used. I simply knew that I had problems as a soldier voting. Think about a sailor on a submarine under the polar ice cap. Yes, Postal Service doesn't reach there. Think about our special operations forces in 70 countries around the world have difficulty getting a ballot, getting it marked, remembering. They've got missions. They're out there with their life on the line, okay? This is a little bracelet. This is a piece of command wire that was used to set off the IED underneath my son's MRAP, okay? I wear it as a constant reminder that there are people out there, soldiers across the globe today, serving for our democracy, our democratic process, and they have trouble voting. Now, here are the numbers. Here's the key, all right? If you have 100 active duty military, 65 of them will register to vote in their home states. 22 on a given election will request a ballot. 18 will receive a ballot, 14 will vote that ballot, and only 13 will have their votes counted. Think of that. 13 out of 100 active duty military get their votes counted on a given election. And if you are a State Department employee working at an embassy, or you're an instructor in Ireland or a student in China, that number drops from 13 to 7. Only 7 people out of 100 right now are getting their votes counted on any given election. Folks, that's a disaster. That is a problem. That needs fixed. That's what when I went into the Secretary of State's office 2 years ago in West Virginia, I said, we got to fix that. See, West Virginia has a high proportion of people who go into the military. And so I said, if anybody's going to lead it, we need to solve that. And I had kids out there serving, okay, that were having trouble voting. So I simply gave the criteria to my staff, said, okay, here's what you need to do. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be auditable. You need to have anonymity in that voting. And the main thing is I don't want you to have to use a fax, a scanner, a printer, because a lot of places, they don't have electricity, okay? I said, now solve it. And that's where the things started working here between some people that she knew that had served on one of the staffs, and they connected the two of us. I said, wow, this is fantastic. Here's a philanthropic organization that's ready to fund that. They wanted to expand voting in the United States using mobile devices, and I had a problem that I need solved. And part of that solution was, so you have a problem, an identified problem, and the solution is a vote with a mobile device secured by the blockchain. Okay, so that's a quick synopsis as to how did we got to here. So if you want to pick it up from there.
So, and I came to it from the same place too, not initially feeling like blockchain necessarily had to be the answer, but in looking at different methodologies, it seemed like it solved a lot of problems, especially around auditability and safety. And so we worked together and we hired a vendor. Their name is Voatz, V-O-A-T-Z, out of Boston. And we did some background checking on them, and Secretary Warner and his staff went up there and did some due diligence. In the primary, we started small with just 2 counties because it was so brand new. We just wanted to make sure that everything worked. But after the primary, we met together and thought about expanding for the general election. And at Tusk, we hired an independent security firm made up of former FBI cybersecurity agents that came in and took a look at everything from the primary to make sure we were in good shape for the general. And I think, I think we all felt pretty positive about it, and the numbers were able to expand for the general. And on our side of things, we want to continue working with West Virginia to make this a reality for 2020. And in the meantime, we're also looking at some municipal elections across the country that would also maybe do military and overseas voters, and then I won't go into this too much because It's not so much related to West Virginia, but there's a big group of people in the disability community that would like to have access to have people vote on their phones, both mobility issues and visual issues, because the phones have accessibility features that would give them more privacy. So, so I think back to the project, you know, how did you feel like people in the state felt about it? And did you get any anecdotal evidence back from people if they liked using it? And, you know, well, what did you learn?
There really is an education process that's involved in this to get the acceptability. And there's some natural pushback by some folks out there, the traditionalists who want the paper ballots. There are people who say nothing should go over the internet and so forth. And so the answer to this, folks, is the risk-reward analysis, okay? You've heard the problem that's out there, the extremely low capability of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine to be able to actually cast a ballot. Think about it. They're the ones putting their lives on the line, and their votes aren't getting in because of hurdles that are put in their way. And that's what this mobile device resolves. It jumps over those hurdles. And so then there's the acceptance within the state. And again, back to somebody else funding this. And folks, my tensions lowered immensely about this when I heard what their solution was Bradley Tusk was a funder behind Uber. He helped solve the Uber situation, transform the transportation in the United States and across the globe. And I said, if he can do that, he can help us, he can help us solve this mobile voting. So when I share that with people, all of a sudden a lot of the angst goes away. Now it's what is the proper approach to this? And so to tell you the truth, here we are at the BlockChainge conference. The blockchain was about the least of my concerns, okay? Once that vote goes into the blockchain, I'm not really worried about it getting hacked, okay? The issue is that Oracle problem on the front end, okay? Is that information that's going in, that's going to be secured by the blockchain, the proper information? That's the vulnerability. That's the vector of attack that could be hacked. And so this is why you want to start small. In that primary, 2018 primary, we only had 13 people that used this, okay? But I wanted it small. And what came out of that is the clerks, okay, you got to get through the clerks. You got to be pushing the education out of the clerks. Here's why. Here's the problem. Here's what we're trying to solve. We need their buy-in. And the clerks came to me and said, we don't have a paper verified voter trail, a voter verified paper trail, all right? And so we couldn't secure a paper, but we could secure an email. When they push that button, as you saw in the video, 3 things happen. The vote goes into the blockchain, an email comes back to the voter, so the voter can verify, yes, that's who I voted for, and another copy comes to the Secretary of State's office at the moment they press that vote button. So we get a digitized voter verified trail, all right? So that's what we did between the primary and the general. Now that we had the general, catch this, remember, I gave you the stats, only 13 get their votes counted, all right, out of all those that requested and so forth. In our situation, we had 147 people who asked for a ballot, 144 votes got counted. Okay, think of the difference. That's a 98% rate versus somewhere in the 50-some% range in the other situation. So if you get that ballot, and the FVAP, the Federal Voter Assistance Program, put out their own data, and they say if you get your ballot electronically, you're 50% more likely to vote and have your vote cast. And we, of course, proved that in spades. So the issue is getting them that ballot. If they can get it, they will. And so to answer the question, I had 2. I had an Air Force pilot who said he was a test pilot out at Edwards Air Force Base. He said, I voted between missions, between flights. I came down, downloaded it. The shortest amount of time it took somebody to vote was 20 minutes to download the apps, go through the verification and so forth. The longest somebody took 42 days. They got the stuff, but they wanted to do further education. They got sent on a mission, whatever, and they voted up right until 7 o'clock on Election Day. It's the last time you can cast that ballot electronically. We had people from 30 countries. Think about that. The small state of West Virginia had people in 30 countries who cast votes. And I'm talking the usual ones in Europe that you might expect, Canada, Israel, and that sort of thing. But we had it from Guinea, Botswana, Armenia. I didn't even know people in West Virginia knew where some of these places were. And we had votes cast. Do you think that somebody in Armenia was going to get to the U.S. Postal Service and get a ballot ahead of time, voted absentee back? No. So we did have strong indications of people who, in fact, my son was one of them, over in the 173rd in Vicenza, Italy. He said, Dad, that's pretty slick. And for my youngest son to say, Dad, that's pretty slick, that meant something to me.
Yeah, it's always great when your kids appreciate the forward-thinking technology that you're using. So what kind of advice would you give other election officials that are thinking about doing this? And have you had conversations with any of them?
I have, and you mentioned the disability community. Start small. work the kinks out. Don't try to get too big too fast. A lot of people have come to me and said, you're going to take this to the whole general population. No, it's a risk-reward analysis. You've heard my analysis on the military. If you take it wide to everybody in the state, when you're back in Morgantown, West Virginia, you have access to go to a polling place, to a precinct. You can cast your ballot. You have 2 weeks to vote early. You have a number of opportunities. The risk there isn't huge, or the reward isn't huge, okay? You have another means to it that the soldier and sailor doesn't. But the risk becomes huge there. If you extend it to the whole population, that's a huge honeypot that the Russians and other people are going to want to come in and try to attack. Right now, to try to hack a soldier, you have to do it between the time that they download that app, get it from the clerk, vote, before they push that button, because once it goes to the blockchain, you're not hacking it. I had in the small state of West Virginia, 998 ballot styles. So the difference between a House and a Senate race and this precinct versus that precinct, 998. So a hacker's got to know which one of those 998 ballot styles that a soldier in Botswana is going to be casting it, and figure out when he pushes that download and when he presses the vote, and they have to be able to hack into that. And risk federal prosecution for doing so. You're not going to change, somebody's not going to hack it for that small total of voters. So the next step probably is into that disability community, but we talk about that like it's a monolithic group. No, in the disability community, you have somebody who's vision impaired, hearing impaired, may be missing arms and that sort of thing. The only way they may be able to communicate is with their eyes or with their breath. Each one of those has a different approach to solving this, and the cell phone may not be the means. So again, I didn't tell my staff you have to solve it with a cell phone or a blockchain. I said, here's the criteria, solve it. And so I think somebody else who has a heart or a passion for each one of those disability situations would be the ones to solve that.
No, I think that's a really good point, because you understood the problem, you had a problem you were trying to solve. It wasn't just about using new technology, it was about solving a problem. And I think, that gave you the wherewithal to withstand some of the critics and others, because you believed in the cause that you were fighting for, and I think that's really important. We have a little time if people have questions. I know this is kind of a new area, so we're happy to take a few.
Hi, did you actually go and survey the voters that voted this way afterwards to find out,
We've heard some anecdotal stuff from people who reached out to us and said what a great, that they thoroughly enjoyed it. They really like it. Okay, as we saw, 144 out of 147 actually cast their ballots. The next time around, we will probably find a way of doing a survey, but we have not gone out and asked for a survey. We wanted to keep it small. One other thing, the lesson, I told you after the primary, we learned the lesson about the verified voter trail. After the general election, we had 140 votes. We had to download those onto paper and then run the paper through a tabulator. I want to automate that. I can do that with 144. If I get 144,000 votes that way, you don't want to do it by paper and hand feed it. You want to automate it. So that's the next challenge for Nimitz with votes. He's the guy. He's the vendor. That's his challenge, to solve that between now and the 2020 election.
Yeah, it's one of the nice things about starting small and being able to get some feedback and learn before we go to the next one how to fix that. So you're not in a situation where there's all these problems, because we fix them as we've gone. And our long-term view is that you try all these things and you solve problems for a lot of different populations, and eventually become something like, I believe, and people who are teenagers now are 12 and 14 years old, like Bradley Tusk's kids. He always uses them as an example. They've grown up doing everything on their phone, so they're going to have some expectation that they're going to be able to do basic functions like voting without having to go wait in lines. But that's down the road, and I agree with Secretary Warner that you start small on this and make sure you're testing it along the way.
Yes, please.
Curious, earlier you were mentioning all the different countries where the soldiers were voting from. Was that from analytics or feedback?
Our vendor can tell where the vote is coming from. So he was able to provide the data to us as to where it came from.
So are there privacy concerns in that case, that they're monitoring what the individual is doing on the app?
And there should be nothing that identifies the voter, so I don't think
IP
that would be a problem. Excuse
IP
me?
address? I mean, that's the problem today. That's what, like, the GDPR is all about, is you can identify who I am based on my device. So I'm just curious if moving forward, if that's going to be addressed.
I'm starting to get your point. If you only have one voter from Botswana, then you could probably identify who that is. But again, the clerk doesn't have that, and there's no reason for us to open it up unless there's a challenged ballot. If the person in Botswana says, hey, I voted for Hillary, but on my email it said I voted for Trump, then we will go back and open it up and give him a new ballot. One other thing, another lesson learned. Two people, the way that it was designed on the phone, when you voted, like in our race, it was Manchin versus Morrissey in the U.S. Senate. Once that person voted, there was a vote button up in the upper right-hand corner, okay? And there was also something like next at the bottom. Well, if you pushed the vote, that closed it out. And the only race you voted for was that. And two people did that. And then they said, wait, I wanted to vote for the House and the local district, House of Delegates and so forth. So when you call on that, then we were able to go back in, spoil that ballot, and open it back up. So there is a little bit of the vendor being able to go in and correct a situation. This isn't perfect, but we're working out those kinks. But yeah, I hope that answered your question. Did you have a question as well, I believe?
It's just out of curiosity, I wanted to know, I'm assuming, this was a permissionless blockchain. Did you see an interest from the populace to go in and verify, look at whether their votes had been registered, or, what kind of an education campaign did you run for them, for the people that were going to vote on this, to understand what they were doing?
Yeah, I think as this goes forward, there would have to be a larger education and marketing campaign, because we were, like Secretary said, starting small. And we don't have an easy way to communicate with military voters. That all goes through this Federal Voting Assistance Program at DOD, and they control the source of information, rightfully so. But Secretary Warner was able to reach out to some of the branches, and I think you had a good response from the Air Force in providing more information. So as we go forward, I think that's going to be one of the things that we're going to have to try. Now, the video was available. There was information for voters if they were interested in learning more about it. But to your question, if anyone wanted to actually go on the blockchain, we would have to ask the vendor that. But I didn't hear a lot of that. They did get the email that verified their vote, but I didn't hear anyone really wanting to go back in more specifically than that.
The Federal Voter Assistance Program, they tried some electronic balloting back in 2010, and I think they had 80-some people that participated in it. And there was a kickback from the community at the time worried about the internet and voting over the internet and so forth. And they came to the conclusion that there are 50 states out there, and they'd have to be dealing with 50 different laws, and they didn't have a lot of funding from Congress. And so they kind of threw their arms up and said, we're not really going to play in that space at the moment. And so they've been waiting for, or people have been waiting for, a state to be the penguin and jump over the edge. And we did that because of my unique situation, as you heard earlier. And so the military, as I went to each of the services, said we have to go through DOD, and the DOD program is that FFAP program. So I kind of ran into a little bit of a brick wall. The Air Force did put out an email to all of their people, and that's why the pilot was able to vote from Edwards Air Force Base or whatever. But we didn't spend one dime that I know of on marketing or whatever. We let this be a word of mouth because, again, I wanted to keep it small, intentionally a pilot program. And again, if somebody's going to go in this direction, I highly recommend you really start small, work out the kinks, let's get some acceptability. And there is a community out there that's going to object to it no matter what. And I've done this in a conference elsewhere, and people started asking the tough questions. Oh, we want to go to the paper ballot 100% and so forth. And we said, if we can show you where this is safe, then would you buy into it? And they said, no, we're going to go with paper. We want to go with paper regardless. So there is going to always be opposition out there. And I'm back to the risk-reward analysis or whatever. And if there's a reason for it, go there because of a reason. Don't just go there because it's sexy or the latest or whatever.
Yeah, makes sense.
Secretary Warner,
Yes.
a quick question on
Sure.
What you did previously, and what was the previous process for validating the voter when they were voting on paper and voting through the mail? I mean, clearly, this app does a great job of validating who the individual is with their ID and the facial recognition, but how did that happen previously?
What happened is you had to make contact with your county clerk, and they would email you the ballot. You would have to print it off, then vote a paper ballot, and then mail that back in. That was the process in 2010 that I actually took part in, which is what gave me this idea originally. I said, hey, this is pretty slick. We can do this, using electrons to at least solve half the problem. That's getting you the ballot. But again, you have to have electricity, you have to have a computer, you have to have a printer, you have to have mail service. And that's why I made my criteria this time saying I don't want you to have any of those. Because I was on a hillside in Afghanistan that didn't have any of those. And so that's why I went to the mobile device to solve that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it seems like you also have additional security in terms of making sure that the voter is who actually receives and casts the ballot in the app than you would have had in a paper process.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 3 times in this process, as you may have picked it up in the video. First, you have to get on your own phone. So that's either a thumbprint or a pen. Okay, so that's getting on. Then you pull out that ID, okay? It has to be a government-issued ID, and it's got a photo on it. And so you take a picture of that photo, and then you take a selfie, and you have to move your eyes. You have to show you're a live person. You just can't hold that same picture up there. And so then the facial identification process verifies that. And if it doesn't match up, you don't vote. So that's a second. Then you get the ballot, you vote, and then you have a third biometric, and that's either the facial or the thumbprint again. So with 3, I think this is far superior to an absentee ballot. That could come in, sit on a desk, somebody else could vote for you, sign it and send it off or whatever. I think there are a whole lot more security protocols in this process.
One of the things that's interesting on the opponents is when they say, well, how about this? What about this? What about that? They're comparing this to perfection, not to the current system. And in a lot of ways, you're like, this is like 10 times better than what we have in certain, especially around military and overseas voters. But they'll come up with, hypotheticals. And, one of them was about, every phone in the country going out on this certain, and I was like, has that ever happened? No, it's never happened, So I think like Secretary Warner said, we're interested in working with people who are skeptical, but open-minded, who might maybe have some questions around the technology and the security going forward, especially if it expands, but are open to, to seeing a solution. There are some who are just not open to it. So that's, after a while, you're like, okay, we can't spend any more time on that. But we are interested in learning, from the philanthropy side. We don't want to promote a technology that's not safe and secure, because that would defeat the whole purpose of getting it easier for people to vote. So
let me give you this one to get your question just a second before I forget it. Folks, we had more voter fraud in West Virginia than the Russians. The Russians did not change one vote in the 2018 election, not one, 2016, okay? And none in 2018 that we know of. In West Virginia, I have 4 convictions for double voting across county lines, across state lines, and so forth. That's where there's more fraud than any of this mobile voting. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Here.
Thank you, Secretary, and I applaud your efforts and really like to see this. I'm curious about 2 things. Under West Virginia law, is the state looking at the identity of the voter, or are they just tallying the vote? Is it a blind vote to them? And is a voter able to check on the ballot that gets registered? So would a voter be able to log back into the system and see their ballot?
Okay. First of all, we lucked out in West Virginia because the code says you are able to transmit electronically. Okay, and so we didn't have to go and change code. We didn't have to go to the legislature or anything else. So we kind of slid through. Some other states may have some difficulty in that arena. For the voter to verify, like I said, they get the email back. As soon as they push vote, they get an email right then. They can open right up there and see that this is what went into the blockchain and also came to our office. If there was a challenged ballot or whatever, we would have that paper email that we print off in our office. We could go in, open that up, and that we could match it up and so on if we needed to. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those would say, and again, that came to us by the clerks after the primary. I wouldn't say we didn't think about it, we just didn't do it for the primary, but there were several that insisted on it, so we did that. And I think that calmed some of the concern out there in the community that was poking holes in us.
Exactly.
Yes, ma'am.
In our household, we spend a lot of time talking about geolocation using mobile apps. From a security standpoint, if you start having troops, especially troops that are in undisclosed locations, casting their votes, how do you deal with that geolocation aspect, since it's something that's very accessible on both Android and iOS systems?
Great question, and that is one of the issues where I think FAP and DoD may be reluctant to move in that direction. If I could get into the DoD system, the best thing would be put up a kiosk at various remote locations and use a DoD protocol security system. So you wouldn't even have to use the mobile apps and so forth. So there is a little bit of a GPS concern that they could track somebody down. I haven't heard that really from the Department of Defense community to any degree. Do you have any
No, we
insights
haven't,
on
but
that?
I think that's right. I think that that might be something like, as it becomes more widespread, that we have to figure out some of those challenges.
Yes, please.
Secretary, what do you see specifically with blockchain in terms of improving the integrity of voting as opposed to other technologies? And also, I know you mentioned a thing about Russia, but in terms of that, do you see, like, even with a third-party vendor that was mentioned before about, knowing our information, at the same time, at least you have access to that third-party vendor and kind of are, have control over that. So
Right.
what you might see as far as using that vendor to help promote more voter confidence in a time that's it's not so much.
Great question, and folks, capture this for me or with me for a second. All right, I went out and there are different aspects. We're big into the cybersecurity arena, but there's a physical security component to this. And think about that. When that absentee ballot comes back, I've been into the courthouses, and a clerk will take it and put it in a drawer. They'll put it in an area, and so the physical securities that I did, one of them, we went and they had cages. It looked good. It was locked from the county clerk's side and so forth. But I opened that door, had them open it. We went back in. On the other side, the door was wide open to the auditor's office. The auditor had the same access right into the voting stuff, okay? That was one. The second one, in one of our larger counties, I went to it, and I said, where do you store your voting equipment? They said, we'll take you down the street and show you. We went down the street, and there it was, labeled on the door, election equipment storage area. That's only half of it. Upstairs was a halfway house. People who, I'm not kidding you. And so they were storing election equipment right next to people sitting there, if they went off the, whatever. So folks, the blockchain, do I feel more secure with the blockchain than I do?
Yeah.
You better believe it, okay? What was the second half of your question?
In terms of having a third-party vendor as opposed to a private company like blockchain, you can't get to the identity. You have more control over identification.
Yeah, they have, the vendor that we used was a permissioned blockchain, and I think that's right. I mean, there's a lot of questions on what type of blockchain to use, and just for the questions that you raised, and I think that's why it's been done that way so far. I mean, I'd say one of the challenges, and if anyone in this room has any ideas on this, we would certainly welcome them. I think one of the challenges in expanding, even if you decided you wanted to expand to more populations, is there's really only 2 vendors in the space that we know of that are doing this in a way that they have a corporate side of their work too. So they'll do elections for universities or the Oscars and things like that, so they have some experience. But in terms of actual voting in elections in municipalities, there's not a lot of people in the space. And so, how do we develop something that, should philanthropy develop something and make it available at a low cost to municipalities and states and counties? I mean, that would be ideal. How do you set that up? What kind of technology people do you need? As a matter of fact, I will raise one other thing too. At Tusk Philanthropies, we're looking to hire an entrepreneur in residence that would actually really focus on this question, because I think we're fine for the next few years, but if you're going to go long term, maybe one of these companies will take off, but you don't want to be counting on the whole idea being dependent on just a few people. So we are looking for help in the technology space in terms of ideas, innovations, people, anyone that you think might be interested, please reach out.
That's one thing I liked, is they were not tied to this system, votes or whatever. I'll share a quick story in a second, but we're vendor agnostic. Whoever comes up with the best solution, we'll move to wherever, who has the best solution. But the fellow that we're working with for this one was Nimit Sawhney, Indian descent, but he's of Sikh religion. And how he got into this is his grandfather was there at the time that Indira Gandhi was assassinated, and it was a Sikh who did it. And so when the next election rolled around, there was this almost like a purge or this attack on Sikhs and so forth, and there were repeated stories of people going into voting booths, a Sikh, and having a pistol put to their head and said, this is how you're going to vote, and so forth. And so the grandfather fled the country and came here, and the family tradition was such that it drove Nimit into the technology area to say, how can we solve this? And what he came up with is if you got the certain iPhones and so forth, and this was new to me, I didn't know this, but there are like 22 pressure points on that cell phone. And you can come up, just like you have your own pin, you can come up with your own special, if you hold it this way or that way, or if you tap it 2 times. There are different ways of sending a signal into that. So if you're doing mobile voting and you want to set up this protocol, you can do that. So if you're being forced to vote under pressure, trigger that warning system that tells the Secretary of State or your county clerk, hey, this is being voted under duress. And folks, we still have some problems in the hills of West Virginia. I don't know if you remember. The John Kennedy election was bought and sold in Logan County, West Virginia, okay? We still have some of those lingering issues in the hills, and so when we move into the mobile voting, there's the question of somebody pressuring you to vote, and NIMIT is coming up with solutions to that. We've got to use technology to make our elections safer. Other questions?
Hello, Secretary. So this is an opinion question. Your vendor for this pilot was Votes, right? A Boston-based company.
Right.
So how do you think, like state entities, how comfortable you think they are with hiring vendors from different countries and states? Like, would you hire a Russian-based team?
Obviously wouldn't hire a Russian-based company. And I think it's once they are here and they are vetted by our own security personnel. Just down the street from where Votes is another firm that was called in on a election, not necessarily fraud, but it was almost like a hang Chad situation in Florida, but it was in Maryland. And it was a paper ballot situation. And I was utterly amazed when they took me in and showed me the way you can screw up a paper ballot. Okay, you're supposed to fill in the little oval like on an ACT or an SAT test. People will underline it, they'll check it, they'll circle it, they'll put an X through it, they'll put a mark beside it. About 100 different ways you can screw up a paper ballot. So when you hear this push, oh, we got to go back to paper ballot. No, there are a lot of ways to screw it. And then when you do that, you're leaving your vote up to somebody else. The Board of Commissioners gets to determine whether your vote counts or not. So right now, I don't know, how many of you have used the express vote system? Is that familiar? It's the best thing going right now. They hand you a piece of paper, not a ballot, and you use an electronic pen, just like the iVotronics and so forth. You stick the paper into the machine and you use electronics to vote your ballot, and then it spits back out. It's not a ballot until it comes out and it's been marked. Now you have a ballot. Before you just had a piece of paper. And you can look at it and say, yes, I voted for Hillary or whoever. So that's the voter verified. Then you stick it into the tabulator, and it keeps the paper copy down below. So you get an electronic tabulation, so your results are instant, but you have a paper backup that you can go to. So that's the state of the art at the moment. That's where we need to. West Virginia, in the 2016 election, we had 16% that had voted that way, 45% in the 2018. By 2020, we're going to have 65%. We're heading towards that express vote system, but it all costs money. That's what, if you heard the HAVA funding, okay, HAVA, Help America Vote Act, Congress gave, we got $3.5 million. We leveraged it. We got almost $12 million worth of buying power to advance us along. All the states are in that situation where they're trying to get more money from the federal government to move to the system. When you do that, accompanied with an electronic poll book system, one county in West Virginia, Montague County, again, somewhat out there leading the nation, you have an electronic voting card, okay, and all your data is on there with a magnetic strip, and all you do is slide that across, and it eliminates that, okay, are you a junior or senior? Did you use a middle initial? Did you change your name because you got married and all that kind of stuff? It's all on there, and it's instantaneous. You slide it through there, you sign, they compare the signatures, they hand you that blank piece of paper. In Montague County, no lines, happy voters, happy poll workers, happy county clerk. They had results to me by 7:30. Folks, we can do this with technology, okay? We just have to get the right process.
Right mix. Yeah, one of the other interesting pilots that's out there now is in LA County, and they've come up with a system that you can get your ballot on your phone, you can do research, you can do whatever you want, you cast your ballot, and you mark your ballot, everything you want, and then now there's one last step, you can't just submit it, but you bring it to a polling place, and you get a QR code, and you just scan it, and then it's done. So again, you don't have to wait in line, you have everything, you've seen how it's marked on your phone before you scan it. So there's a lot of interesting innovations in making it easier for people to vote using technology. It's just, we just have to kind of keep pushing along, and that's also a blockchain-based voting app out there. So there's new things coming in this space, and I think, blockchain in particular, because of its, difficulty in hacking and it's auditable, and you can go back in and look at it, solves at least one of the big problems in moving towards a more innovative process.
I think you've been very generous with your time. Is there maybe one more question, but that's all? Okay.
Secretary, thank you and your family for your service.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you would consider publicizing this technology to domestic voters to vote instead of going to the polls by any chance.
Instead of going to polls?
Instead of actually going to the polls on the day of the election, would you ever publicize to voters to actually just fill out the app?
Here's what I think will happen, okay? I'm not going to be the one out there pushing it for what I described earlier because the risk goes up. But right now, there are 3 states that vote by mail: Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and California has started that as well. There's going to be some issues with California because you're going to actually have votes being cast in California before the Iowa caucuses, and that's a problem with Iowa and New Hampshire and so forth. So just watch that. I'll just give you a little precursor as to what's coming down the road in 2020. But we're going to have the disability community. It makes sense. Okay, I've had 2 doctors come up to me from our legislature said, right now we can take a ballot from a precinct if it's within the county. If the hospital's within the county, so a poll worker can take it over there and have them vote. But if you go across the county line, the poll worker is not allowed to take a ballot across the county line. So if somebody gets sick 3 days before goes into hospital, they're not being able to vote. There are different scenarios like this. And what we're thinking is perhaps changing code that would allow them, under special circumstances, either a doctor's verification or something, that say now we can transmit their ballot electronically. So I do see an expansion of this. It's just until we work out the kinks with the military side and get it perfected, I'm not going to be the one pushing it, but there are going to be other people that will be pushing it.
Like me.
Yeah, and I love what they're doing in LA County and so forth with that. So we need to keep experimenting, okay, and let people solve it based on their own risk-reward analysis. Okay, thank you all. You all have been great, wonderful questions. Appreciate it.